Good afternoon, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. I will continue. Mr. McCausland, I've got a few more discrete, smaller topics to cover this afternoon, and I want to start with the resignation of Susan Crichton. We don't need to turn it up, but in your witness statement at paragraph 146, you say you aren't aware of the reasons as to why Susan Crichton resigned, correct?
Correct.
The inquiry sent you, or gave you this morning, 2 documents. So you didn't have those at the time you made your witness statement. I want to look at them now and explore them with you. Please, can we bring up poll 2038168. It's an email from Paula Venables on the 2nd of September 2013 to you. That says, Neil, I've tried to help our discussion tomorrow, brackets today, by providing a background brief. This is a private note and views and it may change as more information comes to light. I'd be grateful if you treat it as such. Thank you for being available at such short notice. So my reading of that is there's a note being sent to you for discussion in the future. Is that your understanding?
That is.
The subject says, our meeting P&C. What do you know what that means?
Private and confidential, I guess.
Do you recall this? I will come to the note in a moment, but do you recall receiving this and the discussion which we're about to turn to?
I didn't have any recollection of it before you showed it to me this morning. Now that you've showed it to me, I do have a vague recollection of it, yes.
Well, before we turn to that document can come down for the time being. Before we turn to the note, can you recall what Paula Venables told you was the reason she wanted to speak before that email was sent?
My memory, which is not perfect at this stage, but my memory is that she was coming to me in my position as SID because the chair, Alice, and the general counsel, Susan, were having an issue, and Paula probably felt caught in the middle, and Paula was talking to me, which is appropriate in the case where there is some issue with the chair, and wanted my advice, wanted my guidance, my opinion, my counsel. So I think that Paula is trying to draw me into the issue regarding Susan and Alice and the chain of emails which follows.
Let's have a look at the note that was attached, please. It's poll 2038169. See, it says file notes SC/PV, Susan Crichton and Paula Venables, Friday 30/9. It's been established that should be the 30th of August rather than the 30th of September. I'm not going to read all through this, but could we please turn to page 3 first? It says, Neil, this is the end of the brief for our discussion. There are more notes below as context if you have time, but not imperative. So that's just to coordinate where we are in the notes. So if you go back up, please. Thank you. If you could go further up, please. It's page 1. Thank you. If you go a bit further up, sorry. No, sorry. If you further down, please. No, so, if you could go to page 1, please. I think we. Thank you. And then down slightly, please. Thank you. That's it. Thank you. So there's a note here of the conversation. In the paragraph that says she again raised that Alice had made mistakes, it goes on to say, and I said that whilst I would be asking Alice about a couple of challenges Susan raised, brackets, Alice believing Donald and Biz at the Department for Business Innovation and Skills believing comments about a PO cover-up. Do you remember discussing that aspect of the note with Paula Venables?
I saw that this morning and was interested in it, but I do not have any recollection of that at the time.
If we go back to page 3, please. Got the reflection section. Now, just up slightly again, please. Thank you. It says, as we said here before, Neil, there are more notes below as context if you have time, but not imperative. Would you have read the remainder of the document?
Yes.
Yeah. Could we... There we are. It's the third paragraph down. It says, Susan had said to me prior to my leave that she would never have put a business she worked for in the situation we found ourselves with the second site interim report, and she wished she had never allowed Alice to persuade her to do the independent review. Can you recall discussing that aspect with Paula Venables?
So this is fresh in my mind from this morning, and my mind hasn't had a long time to think about it. So I really cannot remember the conversation that I had with Paula more than 10 years ago. I'm sorry, I can't flesh that out. I'm sure I would have read the note. I'm sure I spoke to her about everything in the note. But I cannot remember the details of that conversation, I'm afraid.
So if I asked you any more questions on this, you wouldn't be able to assist us with what was said in the at the conversation?
I will not be able to remember the actual conversation. I'm happy to reflect on what I think I would have said, but as to what I actually did say, I would struggle.
Do you have any recollection at all about how the conversation went? If it's not precisely words that were used, but the overall tenor of the conversation?
Yes. So, or do I? I'm not quite sure if it's an actual recollection or if it's what I'm imagining. I would have said, but I think that my reaction to Paula would have been that Susan is being over emotional about it. She should have resigned over the second site review nonsense. We were right to do the second site review. There's nothing wrong with doing the second site interim report. That's no reason at all to resign. That's daft. And being left in the corridor outside the board meeting, yes, it's clumsy, but it's not a resigning matter. The post office was in a real mess. We were doing all sorts of things. There were lots of other members of the executive who would come into the board meeting and frankly get a hard time. So Kevin would come in and be talked about the network. Martin, Nick. It was a robust environment. So for somebody to be upset about being left in a corridor, get over it. It's not a resigning issue. So I think I would have been relatively robust with Paula that this is Susan's job. Just tell her to get on with her job and not be so sensitive. That's probably what I would have said. That's my vague recollection, but I honestly cannot remember the specifics of that conversation.
Can we look at an email sent around that time? It's Pol 20146244. So the email I took you to earlier was on the 2nd of September 2013 in the evening. This is an email from Paula Venables to you on the 3rd of September in the morning. Neil, sorry to bombard you with emails, but this is useful. Ideally, you should read this after my briefing note. I think I think indicates a way through. So this is also dealing with what you were discussing at that conversation. And if we look down, please, it's Hugh Flemington sort of sets it out and says, please see comments below from both Simon Richardson and Andy Parsons regarding risks of LL review. That's the lessons learned review, isn't it?
Yes.
And just for context, the lessons learned review is the review the board asked to be carried out into how the second site review had been handled within the business.
Yes.
And as we see, we have an email there from Simon Richardson. And if we turn, please, to page 2 at the bottom. Got one from Andrew Parsons, also of Bond Dickinson. Would you have read these emails?
Yes.
Do you recall speaking about them with Paula Reynolds?
Vaguely.
What is your vague recollection?
So Alice had asked for a lessons learned review after the board meeting on the 16th, where the whole board were dissatisfied with the progress. Initially, that had was due to be done by Alistair as chairman of ARC. That had then migrated, which I'm not sure I was aware of, but it migrated to Richard Hatfield. And this email that here is basically then Susan arguing, Susan getting lawyers' opinion to argue why we shouldn't be doing it. So at the time, I think I was frustrated, and I remember being frustrated by the whole of the lessons learned review, because actually I wanted to do a lessons learned review. I don't think that the business had handled it well, and therefore you should understand it and learn from it. And we were being steered away from this lessons learned review by lawyers telling us it was a bad thing and we would put ourselves at risk. And therefore I think that I would have accepted it, because it's quite strong legal advice saying from a business point of view we should not do that. But at the time I do remember being very frustrated by the lessons learned review. With hindsight, I see it very differently, and it feels like Susan is one of the reasons that she's so against it is because she's frightened that the lessons learned review is going to turn up some of the things that, frankly, should have come to the board and didn't.
Pausing there, we've seen a document by Belinda Crowe setting out lessons learned and how to deal with things like second site review going forward.
Yes.
In your evidence then, you said you accepted it. Were you referring to the legal advice here in these emails, that you accepted this legal advice?
Yes.
So we know that there was a lessons learned review that was actually commissioned and finished by Belinda Crowe. Did this legal advice here change the scope of that review?
Very, very much so, yes. So the original scope was going to be done by Alistair, understanding, talking to Susan. Then it went to Richard Hatfield, and then I think Susan, we all hoped it would become a big review, but clearly Susan didn't hope that. And then after this legal advice, the scope changed and got downsized very significantly into a fairly dull piece of work that then did come out from Belinda as the lessons learnt review.
If we turn to page 3, please. One of the points that's made by Mr. Parsons refers to disclosure of the review. We see something the inquiry sees a lot, a point on privilege. This review will not be legally privileged. But then it says, under criminal disclosure, should the review reveal any concerns about Horizon or branch accounting processes, then Post Office may be obliged, under criminal procedure rules, to proactively pass this information to sub-postmasters involved in criminal prosecutions, brackets both ongoing and historic. In particular, recommendations for change could be interpreted as highlighting historic problems that would need to be disclosed. Are you saying you accepted that legal advice?
So there is quite a lot of argument here, I think there are two documents there, aren't there? There's there are two different people.
Yes.
There's an email basically saying why we shouldn't do it, and then there's a report saying why we shouldn't do it. So I don't think that I would have gone into any of the individual lines in that much detail, but I would have read it and thought we're being told very clearly by two different external lawyers that it is a bad idea for the business to do this. And therefore, I am not a lawyer, I have no legal experience, and to go against my general counsel backed up by two external lawyers, I wouldn't. I would take their advice.
So is it fair to summarise it this way, that you, Alice Perkins, you and Alice Perkins wanted a larger review than in fact happened?
Yes.
Susan Crichton obtained this legal advice from Bond Dickinson. You felt that you needed to accept the advice from the lawyers, and that resulted in the lessons learned review being narrowed in scope.
Yes.
Thank you. That document can come down. At the time, did you have any concerns as to Susan Crichton's motives for seeking to narrow the scope of the lessons learned review?
No, I didn't. And frankly, even when Susan Crichton resigned, I didn't suspect that she had bad motives in doing that. As this inquiry has peeled away the layers, frankly, I have become appalled. But at the time, I had no feeling of that at all.
I want to move now to another topic. It's oversight of prosecutions and future prosecution policy. In your statement, we don't need to turn it up, but it's paragraph 55. You say that during the recruitment process, you had no knowledge whatsoever with regards to the investigation prosecution of sub-postmasters for theft, fraud or false accounting. That was September 2011. We saw the board minute on 12th January 2012, which referred to prosecution. So you were aware in broad terms of the prosecutorial function by then?
Not really. So I was aware that prosecutions were happening. I wasn't aware that we were bringing the prosecutions.
If we just bring that note back up of the actually, no, we don't need to. So your evidence is January, you were aware that prosecutions were happening.
Yeah.
But just explain what you mean by not that we were bringing them.
So when the November 13 report came out for the ARC explaining the prosecutorial functions, which you took me to earlier this morning, that explained that Brian Altman had done a review and that he explained that Royal Mail Group and POL were virtually the only people to bring their own prosecutions. And if you go back to 11-12, I was aware that prosecutions were happening, but I assumed that they were happening through the CPS or the police. So the concept of a company itself bringing a prosecution, I just hadn't ever heard of that. I didn't know about it. I hadn't thought about it. So when I was reading about these prosecutions have happened, in any other world that I had lived in, there would be an internal investigation team who would understand the issue, but then present evidence to the CPS, and they would bring the prosecution. So that's how I originally assumed it happened.
Would you agree that if a company pursues prosecutions as Post Office did, that is an unusual type of operation for it to be involved with?
Absolutely.
Would you agree that, I'm not here pointing to what you were or weren't aware of, but in terms of what the board should be doing, would you accept that the board should have oversight of how those prosecutions are conducted?
Yes.
Do you think you should have... So it sounds like we have a fire alarm.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? Fire has been reported in the building.
Yeah, so with a fire alarm, we may have to break for a moment. Good afternoon, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Fortunately, it wasn't a serious fire alarm, so we're back and I'll continue. Mr. McCausland, just before the fire alarm, I asked you if the conduct of criminal prosecutions was an unusual type of operation for a company, and you agreed. I then said, without exploring your actual knowledge of Post Office's role in prosecuting, would you accept that the board should have oversight of how those prosecutions were conducted? And your answer was yes.
Yes.
You, just before that, in your evidence, said you weren't aware of Post Office's role as a prosecutor in January 2012. That came later. Who at Post Office, whose responsibility was it for informing directors like you of its role as a prosecutor?
I think the prime responsibility was probably with Susan Crichton as GC, who ran that area, or before her, I think Mike Young ran the area, and probably Paula as the second.
And what about the chair? Does the chair have any responsibility for the induction of non-executive directors?
Yes, if the chair knew.
And in terms of the systems of oversight, what I mean by that is what systems should be in place for overseeing, in this case, prosecutions. Who at the board was responsible for seeing that a system of oversight for prosecution was in place?
From an executive point of view, Paula had the prime responsibility for that, in that she ran the company.
Would it be a case of Paula Fennells had the responsibility of informing the board of the operation, namely prosecutions, and then the board would come to its own view of what was appropriate oversight of the executive in those circumstances?
Yes.
And I was going to ask you a series of questions about why the board did not oversee prosecutions until this interim report whilst you were there, but your answer to that will be you weren't aware of the you personally weren't aware of the prosecutions. Is that fair?
I certainly wasn't aware that we did our own prosecutions. As I say, that it was just I'd never thought of that happening.
Were you aware that Post Office, and again this is in January 2012, were you aware that Post Office had its own investigation department?
Nobody had explicitly said that, but I had assumed that was the case, and by implicit, yes. So certainly other companies I had worked with would have had their own investigation team, and I had assumed that there was an investigation team in Post Office. I'm not sure that I ever knew who it was or where it was, but yes, I would have assumed it was there.
Do you recall whether the board conducted oversight of the conduct of the Post Office investigation team between you joining as a senior independent director and the interim report?
I cannot remember that we did, no.
Why do you think that was?
I think probably just because of the weight of other things which were going on, and it just past prosecutions were not that big a feature for us.
To pause it there, I'm talking about ongoing prosecutions at this point, so not things that have happened in the past, prosecutions that Post Office are currently pursuing or will pursue in future.
Okay, so prosecutions, not just past, prosecutions were not as big a focus for us as they should have been, or as with hindsight I would like them to be. our focus was very much on trying to understand the integrity of Horizon. That was the thing that I was hearing from Alice. Laura Butternut was talking to us about. That's what Second Sight Review is about, is really trying to understand the integrity of Horizon. The conduct of prosecutions, past or present, wasn't as big a feature, and I don't think that we were aware that there was as big a problem as clearly that there was. So I think it was a lack of awareness, coupled by the weight of other things which were on our plate: separation, costs, people, culture, revenue. Yeah, it was very, very busy board, and Horizon absolutely bubbled up as the integrity of Horizon bubbled up as something that the board needed to spend time on. The prosecution function didn't bubble up in the same way.
Last question I have on this, and it may be, it's a very similar answer, but we've heard evidence, or the inquiry's heard evidence as part of separation, lawyer, or at least one lawyers from Royal Mail Group transferred into Post Office Limited, including a criminal lawyer called John L. Singh. And so there's effectively a transfer of the criminal part of the criminal law team into Post Office Limited as part of separation. When you were dealing with separation and separation issues, were you at all involved with looking at overseeing new parts of the business that had come into the Post Office, such as the criminal law team?
No, I did have some involvement in the separation issues, but they tended to be where there was conflict between Post Office and Royal Mail Group, and there were many such issues. But a normal transfer of people across, I did not have sight of.
I want to look then now briefly at the future prosecutions policy following the interim report. Can we look please at poll 3038678? So we see it's a minute of the Audit Risk Compliance Subcommittee held on the 19th of November. You're present, second on the line there. And further down we see both Paula Venables and Chris Oyard in attendance as well. If we turn please to page 3. And to the bottom of that page, Chris Oyard updated the committee on the approach to prosecutions brought by the Post Office, and as we're going to see, it introduces a paper on the prosecutorial role going forward. Was that the first time in your career that you'd been involved in decisions as to a future policy of prosecutions?
Yes.
Can we turn the page, please, to page 4? Paragraph C. Chris Oyard explained that one of the issues was the perception that sub-postmasters had of the Post Office bringing prosecutions of false accounting rather than theft, which was easier to establish. The committee asked whether the business would still be able to recover branch losses through the civil courts. Chris Oyard explained that this would still be open to the business, but it may be slower and not recover as much. Now, pausing there, to what extent at this stage were the committee seeing that prosecutions was a method of obtaining or recovering money from sub-postmasters?
So at this meeting, we were not being asked to make a decision at this meeting, and it was very much a questioning session. So particularly the 3 members of the ARC, Alistair, the chair, Tim and myself, were trying to understand how we did it. And so there were lots of questions. And certainly one of those questions was about recovery. One of them was about, the 2 main areas were about recovery and deterrence. But there were a lot of questions just about how does it work? What are the sums of money? And there weren't as many answers as we wanted, which was why we asked for a far more detailed piece of work, which subsequently came to the February ARC.
You mentioned deterrence, and as we see in the last line, it says the committee supported this, but was nervous about changing the approach to prosecutions, as in their view, this acted as a deterrent. Why was it thought necessary to have a deterrent in the form of Post Office pursuing its own prosecutions?
It wasn't. So it was felt necessary to have a deterrent, but not necessarily for Post Office to bring its own, i.e. perfectly happy for the CPS to bring prosecution, or for the Post Office to bring a prosecution, but to have no prosecutions. That was what was making the ARC nervous.
Do you have any recollection? We see it. Sorry, I should say it. D. It says the CEO thanked the committee for the helpful challenge, stressed that the business was not saying it would never bring prosecutions, but that it would be more circumspect in the cases it chose to take. You've mentioned before, minutes are obviously not the full record. Do you have any other recollection of what Paula Vennell said in respect of Post Office's prosecutorial role at this meeting?
I don't at this meeting. She subsequently sent around some emails between this meeting and the next meeting with some of her views. I guess that her views were the same, but I cannot remember her views at this meeting.
I'm not going to take you to the emails. They're a matter of record. I do want to come to one matter which involves a potential conflict of evidence. Can we look, please, at poll 3030900? We've been to this document already, and we'll see at page 2. It's the report by Chris Oyard. Could we turn, please, to page 3? And if we could just go down to options considered, please. So the options put forward are A, preserving the status quo, so retaining prosecutorial capability and continuing with the prosecution's policy. B, pursuing a prosecution's policy more focused on more egregious misconduct. And C, ceasing all prosecutorial activities. In your witness statement at paragraph 157, which is page 59, we don't need to bring that up. You say that my recollection is that myself, Alice Perkins and Susanna Story were largely in support of option 3, whereas the executive largely favour option 2. That still accords with your recollection.
It is.
And why did you favour option 2? Sorry, option 3. Sorry.
So, in this meeting, I was trying to understand two things. First of all, the recovery, and secondly, the deterrent. And if we look at the recovery, so there was a chain of emails before this where I was questioning Chris on the amounts. And if I could ask you just to scroll up a little bit.
Yes.
to 3. Just there is fine. This document, I then emailed Chris to say, help me understand these figures a bit more. And it became apparent from this that in criminal prosecutions, forgive me if I get the number slightly wrong, criminal prosecutions, we had losses of 1.6 million and we recovered 740. However, it had cost us £500,000 to do so because we employed a small army of lawyers and each recovery cost about £7,500. So net, we were recovering 200,000 from 1.6. Whereas civil, we were recovering 1.9 and it was costing us about 100,000. So from a recovery point of view, we were actually much better using civil rather than criminal, which wasn't clear, and that wasn't evident from either of the papers, which was why I was trying to unpack that and understand it. And I was encouraging Chris to actually unpack civil, because all of his paper and all of the ARC policy was about criminal, and civil was dealt with very separately. So I'm saying, should we not be looking at civil as well? Because actually, from a recovery point of view, civil seems to be working much better than criminal. Separately, we were looking at a deterrent, and I think that everybody in the ARC felt that there should be some deterrent, i.e. we shouldn't just stop all prosecutions, but I don't remember any of the NEDs saying that we should be doing ourselves. All of the NEDs from memory, this is a long time ago, but all of the NEDs from memory thought that it was weird that POL was bringing its own prosecutions. And therefore, we were coming to this from an instinctive point of view to say, yes, we should continue to do prosecutions. Ideally, those are probably done by the CPS, and civil is actually better than criminal from a recovery point of view. Understand the two things are separate. However, there was strong arguments put by Paula that said, we're in transition here. We've got the business support program happening. We've got the mediation scheme happening. CPS is overloaded, and our advice is that the CPS actually may not be able to do anything. And therefore, we should, whilst moving towards option C, let's do it gradually. Let's take a step towards option B, and then maybe we'll review it and go to option C. And because all prosecutions were paused, because we had paused all prosecutions, I thought that was okay. So my instinct, and I think the NED's instinct, was option C is better, because why do we need to have an army of criminal lawyers ourselves, do the investigation, and then hand it over to the CPS, as long as CPS would prosecute some, the worst. But as a stepping stone, happy with option B, because frankly it wasn't going to make much difference, because we weren't doing any prosecutions anyway.
That document can come down, thank you. Alice Perkins said in her evidence that she recalled you being in favour of option 2. I assume you take it that your position on that is she's mistaken.
Well, I ended up supporting option 2. So, I mean, I'm not sure when in the debate she was talking about. So my instinct, and I think I started off going option C is better, but I was okay with Paula's arguments, and therefore I did support option 2 as an interim step. I mean, and the paperwork is quite clear that it's a pro tem interim step.
As part of this conversation, this debate, did Chris Ojar say anything about the future costs of bringing prosecutions, namely the cost of a new expert?
So in the previous ARC, I think there was that reference that you took me to earlier that said that if we were to do a new...
This is in this paper. It's the February paper.
I don't recall that coming up in the February paper, but certainly from the November paper, and therefore in my mind, will have been that we need to have a new independent expert, and there will be a cost to get that person up to date.
Sorry, just we can bring it back up so you can see it.
Is that in that paper as well?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, sorry.
It is. Well, if you're happy to take it from me, it's mentioning £200,000
Yes.
for the likely cost.
Apologies, I thought that was in the November
No need
paper.
to apologise. But just with that clarified in your mind, in February 2014, do you recall discussing that issue on the cost of an expert witness with Chris Ojar?
No. I don't believe that was a factor in the conversation at all.
I want to look very briefly at the mediation scheme, please. Can we turn to poll 2045891? So we went to this email earlier. It's the Susan Crichton and you emailed each other in August. But if we can go down, please, to Alice Perkins' email on the 31st of July. It says first, well, the point she makes is first, while it is clear that we are committed to using Second Sight for the 47 cases which are already in the frame for their review, it is extremely important that we cap their involvement at that. The moment they are involved in additional cases beyond these, we will have lost the ability to end the relationship with them, an outcome which I do not want to have to contemplate. Did you discuss that issue with Alice Perkins in July or August of 2013?
I cannot remember specifically discussing that aspect with her.
Were the board or the NEDs at this point looking for ways as a strategy to have Second Sight removed from or their involvement limited in the cases going forward?
I think the NEDs had and the board had different views on the involvement of Second Sight. Personally, I didn't believe that we could get rid of Second Sight. Actually, I didn't want to either. I think there was a shared concern about the resource of Second Sight. So Second Sight at this stage were going to work with the working party to do a detailed case review for each of the cases going into mediation. We didn't know how many that would be. And at the same time, they were going to continue their own report on the thematics that they'd started from the interim. So for two people, that was an unbelievable amount of work. They'd already taken a year, which was a lot longer than had been expected. And therefore, trying to limit the amount of work that Second Sight did absolutely was probably a shared objective. I think Alice probably felt more strongly that she would like the ability to end the relationship, as she says. I don't think that was a shared board view. And in fact, if you come to some of the later conversations in the summer of next year, again, it's clear that it wasn't. The board did not have one view on that. There were differences of opinion.
So with Alice Perkins, who is taking a stronger view to you on the use of Second Sight going forward. Do you recall any other board members who shared her view?
I don't. She was working more closely with Second Sight than any of the others at that stage. So when the Sparrows subcommittee came into existence, Richard and Alistair shared that work with her, and I think actually they probably came over more to her point of view. But I don't remember any of the others sharing her view.
Did you have any concern as to Alice Perkins losing her independence in respect of Second Sight by being involved more in the being more involved with them?
I didn't. Alice was, she had bags of integrity. So I never doubted her integrity or her honesty or her straightforwardness or her desire to do the right thing.
Could we look, please, at poll 201325? If we look to the bottom of that page, please, we see an email from Mark Davis to a number of people on the board. You're in the distribution list, I think it's third line down. It's the 5th of September 2014, and it refers to a BBC North reporter who's clearly seen a copy of the reports, being the Part 2 report. And if we go to the next email up, another email from Mark Davis on the 9th of September. It says a report on the leak has been broadcast within the last few minutes on BBC Radio 4. And then your reply is shortly afterwards on the same day. As you run this through, I wonder if you could also see if there is any way that we could use this leak, brackets seriously damaging to our reputation, etc., to stop, alter the process that we are involved in. Pausing there, why was the leak seriously damaging to the Post Office reputation?
Because it was incorrect.
So you said the content of the second site report was incorrect?
No. So the leak. So what was reported was absolutely incorrect.
Right. So it's the... You're referring there to what's reported on Radio 4 rather than to the report itself?
Yeah, this isn't about the report. This is about the leak. So the leak was reported on Radio 4, and the report is inaccurate. It was just wrong. We took it up with the journalist, but it was damaging. So the fact that we had a incorrect leak, I was annoyed by. I didn't like that.
At that point, can you recall what you thought was incorrect about the report?
I cannot recall it. I'm sure it's in the documents, and it says it just at the bottom of the screen there.
Why did you want to stop, alter the process at that point?
Well, I think, and if you read the whole of it, it says it would be great to find a faster, better way out of Sparrow. So where are we now? September of 14. At this stage, my thinking had moved on, and if you go back a few months to June, I think it was, the Sparrow subcommittee had come to the board with a recommendation that actually we bring the mediation scheme in-house. And the board, and let's face it, there's only three of us, me, Virginia and Tim, who are not on the subcommittee, had rejected that and said, no, actually, we should continue with it. So we did continue with it. But by the time we got to the autumn, the mediation scheme was still incredibly slow. We'd had very, very few cases go through to mediation, very few cases mediated, and very, very, very few cases successfully mediated. So clearly it wasn't working. And I think everyone was saying that. It wasn't just us. So Sir Alan Bates was saying that, the MPs were saying that, JFSA was saying that, Anthony Hooper was saying that. So yeah, I'm trying to find a better, faster way out of Sparrow. So I'd already talked about a number of things. I had suggested and was trying to get second site put on piece rate rather than a day rate. You know, we're incentivizing them to go slowly the way we were paying them, incentivizing them to get more people. They have more than 2 people at this stage, but 2 people against 20 is daft. Maybe paying more. I mean, let's look again at paying people more and try to settle, because clearly the amount that we were paying in mediation wasn't working. So we needed to find a faster, better way out of Sparrow. And the leak was, so if we could use the leak, which did annoy me. So the fact that there is a leak says that the process isn't working. If the process is working, you wouldn't get a leak. So can we use the leak to find a faster, better way out of Sparrow? That's what I was asking.
So at this point, you refer to June 2014, where you say there's a proposal brought forward to questioning whether ending the scheme. Obviously, June 2014 is when the board briefing for Deloitte is presented as well. At this point, was there any discussion for the potential faster or better way out to be to commission Deloitte to do part 2 of the work, or is that still on the back burner?
There wasn't any discussion about that. The discussion here was about the mediation scheme, really. So this conversation here and getting out of Sparrow, it's about mediation scheme. So we had a working party, lots of people working, individual case reports. We had a mediation scheme, CEDR, but it just didn't appear to me in September of 14 that the mediation scheme was effective. And therefore I was looking for a better or faster way to get out of the current way that we were doing things. Open to any ideas, kicking ideas around, but just doing what we were doing didn't seem like a sensible thing.
Can we look, please, at poll 20102370? So the email at the top there is from Alwyn Lyons on the 10th of March to you and others on the board, and it's effectively setting out what had happened that day from Jane McLeod and Mark Davis, and that was the day on which the working group was terminated. And you have emailed in response, "That feels very well handled. I'm sure it will ignite some more, but so far, so good." If we look down at the email itself, the update, we see the explanation of what happened, and then there has been a very low-key response, and over the page, setting out some of the response back to it, including from journalists and on Twitter. So we can go back to page 1, please. And further up, please. Thank you. When you say, "I'm sure it will ignite some more, but so far so good," are you there referring to what ignites some more? You're referring to press reaction?
Yes.
In your witness statement, we don't need to bring it up, but it's page 67, paragraph 178. You respond to a question on the use of the words "very well handled," and you say the closure of the working group was a sensitive issue and needed to be handled carefully and effectively so that the postmasters did not disengage from the mediation scheme. It was common for me to give praise to members of Post Office who had executed a task well, to say thank you and well done. Were you in fact here congratulating Jane McLeod and Mark because you thought they had done a good job of keeping pressure off Post Office to reverse the decision?
To reverse the decision that we had made to terminate the working party? Not at all. So most of the people involved in this, Sir Alan Bates, maybe not Sir Alan Bates, certainly JFSA, MPs, Lord Arbuthnot, were basically saying all cases should go to mediation. So for some months, we had been told, the Post Office had been told, all cases should go to mediation.
Opposing there, they weren't saying all cases should go to mediation and the working group as the independent oversight should be discharged, were they?
So the working group had if all cases went to mediation, there was no purpose for the working group. So we still funded Second Sight to do the independent report, which would go along with the case review, but the working group had ended up being a weird thing where Post Office were saying yes or no, JFSA were saying yes or no, Sir Anthony Hooper was sometimes making a casting vote, and people were arguing about should something go into the mediation scheme or not, which was just a waste of time and energy. So you're much better off just binning the working party and putting all cases into mediation. So, and I don't think, I don't know why anybody would want to reverse that decision, because actually we, the Post Office, had been asked to do that for some months beforehand by pretty much all the people involved.
It's right, isn't it, that the Post Office had also been asked to mediate cases in which there was a criminal conviction?
Yes.
And Post Office's decision was not to do so?
Yes.
And do you not think the working group had a role in overseeing those cases where there was a conviction that had entered into the mediation scheme?
I'm not sure that I see the link. So we, the Post Office, was under the impression that, and we were advised, that the mediation process is not appropriate for a criminal conviction, and only the Court of Appeal can actually overturn that. So whilst we would go through the collecting of evidence and the case review, putting it into a mediation scheme wasn't advised to be a sensible thing, because it needed to go back to the Court of Appeal, in order to overturn a criminal conviction. And the mediation process, even under CEDR, has got absolutely no authority to change a criminal conviction.
I want to briefly look at two very discrete topics in respect of shareholder executive. The first is the role of the shareholder executive non-executive director. Can we bring up, please, poll 30-21507? This is the meeting of the 23rd of May 2012, which we've been to already today, but could we look at page 4 this time? It's a note of Susanna's story outlining the reasons for representation of the shareholder executive on the board. And the last part, she says, she clarified that she would not be sharing the board papers with her colleagues in shareholder executive. Are you aware as to if anyone from Post Office had asked her not to share her papers with her shareholder executive colleagues?
I'm not aware if anyone had asked her not to. I do recall that there was a difference between Susanna Story and Richard Callard's time in that, and I might have this slightly wrong, but Richard did share and had a fully integrated function as being running that department in checks and also being a non-executive director. Susanna, and I can't remember the reason for it, there was a view that there might be a conflict of interests, and there Susanna was the NED on the board, but I'm not sure that she ran the team in checks, and there was like a Chinese wall between them. I've got to say, I think that the situation with Richard is far better than the situation with Susanna.
Better for who?
Just better all round, better for the shareholder, better for Paul.
So you don't know this, where it says she clarified she would not be sharing the board papers. You've got to assist us with where the origin of that came from, why she thought she didn't need to share her board papers with colleagues at Shecs.
I'm guessing it's something with Alice, and I'm guessing it's coming from Alice.
Was there any resistance on the board to a shareholder executive, non-executive director being appointed?
I do recall an early conversation with Alice where she had some nervousness about it.
Do you remember what she said about her nervousness?
I honestly cannot remember. So in my life, I have always got a shareholder on the board, and I always find it useful to have a shareholder on it. So every other board that I've sat on, I've got a shareholder there. And I find it really useful for the shareholder to be there. Every now and again, there's a conflict of interests and somebody recuses themselves, but that's very, very rare. 99 times out of 100, it's helpful to have the shareholder representative on the board. And I do remember having that conversation with Alice, where I think Alice was okay with it.
Just going to your experience of sitting on boards with other shareholder representatives, the way in which Susanna Story and Richard Callard fulfilled that role, was that consistent with how you'd seen the shareholder role fulfilled in other boards you'd sat on? Yes.
I think inevitably they have quite a difficult tightrope to walk, because the aims are sometimes different. So at the end of the day, they are there looking after the shareholder interests, but they're also there as a director of the board, and sometimes those two will diverge. But I think they both perform that role reasonably well.
I want to look at another matter, again relating to a shareholder executive issue. In Richard Callard's witness statement to the inquiry, he referred to an away day in June 2014, which he said that many members of the board felt at that away day that Paula Venables was acting more like a non-executive director than a CEO. Did you share that view, and do you recall that away day?
I did share that view. I do vaguely recall the away day. There is a fairly long history to Paula, which is not desperately satisfactory. And Paula's performance, which I touched on this morning, her performance changed over time, and our view of her performance changed over time. But certainly in 2014, her performance was not great. In fact, probably towards the end of 13 and 14, her performance was not great. And as you will be aware, we did conduct an exercise with a firm of headhunters to market, map, and understand alternatives.
Your concerns, to what extent, sorry, I'll repeat that. Your concerns with Paula Venables, to what extent did they relate to her handling of matters such as the second site review and complaints as to Horizon's integrity?
They were not the main area of concern.
Was it an area of concern?
Not that I can recall. I don't recall her handling of Horizon being at issue. She was very heavily involved in Horizon. She and Alice spent a lot of time, a lot of energy involved in Horizon. Arguably, Paula didn't spend enough time on other things. Now, clearly, with hindsight, that's wrong, and she didn't spend even enough time with Horizon or do the right things. But the criticism of her wasn't specifically about Horizon. It was really about the leadership of her team, the management of the business, the lack of commerciality, the strategy aspects.
I want to briefly deal with one matter which is way ahead in the chronology. In fact, it's after the Horizon Issues trial, and it's communications you had with Paula Venables in 2020. Please can we bring up PVEN 50362? And if we could go to the second page, please. You see, these are text messages provided by Paula Venables. They're marked as being from you, in an exchange with you on the 3rd of March. Do you recognise these as being texts that you sent to her and received from her?
Yes.
You say, oh, sorry, did you say something? Sorry. No, sorry. You say, good morning, Paula. Just to let you know, I'm a tad early and I'm in Paddington. So you're referring to a meeting that you're about to have with her. Do you remember the purpose of meeting with her on the 3rd of March 2020?
Yes. So this is an extract from a slightly longer chain of text messages, which I'm not sure if you have or not. The earlier ones, which I looked at on my phone once I got these, I'd forgotten these. Basically, Paula texted me to say she just had a coffee with Alice. She's trying to remember and catch up on things regarding post office. Would I have a cup of coffee with her, please? So I said, yeah, I left post office a long time ago. My memory of post office is poor. I haven't got paperwork, so I'm really not going to be much use to you, but I'm happy to have a coffee. So we had a coffee.
And we see the text we have there around 11:13, 11:15. Later on in the evening, It says from Paula, lovely to see you. Thanks for your wisdom, memory, time and coffee. We'll keep you posted. Do you remember what topics you discussed with Paula Venables at that meeting?
So Paula was asking me for my recollections of Post Office. And honestly, I had very few recollections of Post Office. And I don't think that I told her anything that she didn't already know way more than I did. And that lasted maybe 10 minutes. And then it morphed into a conversation about her because she was not in good form.
Just pausing there, I'm only going to explore with you matters that are relevant to the evidence of the inquiry. I don't want to pry into anything further. Do you, in that 10-minute conversation, can you recall any specific topics that she asked you about in particular regarding Post Office?
The second site investigation, the mediation scheme, business improvement programme, working party. I think the only thing that I can remember is second site and the spin-offs from that. I don't think there was a conversation about prosecutions. So I think it was second site, mediation, working party.
Could we look, please, at PVEN 6015? So if we go to the bottom of that page, please. We've got an email about a week later, on the 15th of March. Hi, Paula, forgive me for being paranoid with the email address. All very well here, thank you. I had looked before and found nothing. I stumbled across these two bits that I just seem to have neglected to throw out. They may be of some small use, if only to jog your memory of the players involved. What request were you responding to here?
Paula had asked if I had any paperwork regarding, say, the things that she had been asking about. Second site, mediation scheme, working party.
Thank you, that can come down. I have two final broad questions on reflections. We've gone in detail about the board oversight of IT and prosecutions from 2012 to onwards, really. To what extent do you think the board would have been assisted if it had a non-executive director with specialist expertise in IT?
I think that it would have been very useful to have somebody with IT expertise on the board. And I also think it would have been very useful for us to have, arguably more useful, for us to have somebody with legal experience on the board. I have heard a lot of my peers, colleagues, ex-colleagues, say that they thought the board, or agree that the board wasn't curious enough. And actually, I personally don't agree with that. So if I think about the board was very curious. It was quite combative. It was quite challenging. Horizon issues aside, we were a very, very busy board dealing with some very difficult problems, and we made very good headway on many of those things. And we did that in quite a challenging environment. So the whole environment was quite challenging. With Horizon issues, I think partly because nobody on the board had good IT or good legal skills, and I'll perfectly happily admit I don't have good IT and good legal skills. That wasn't why I was recruited. I think the level of challenge probably wasn't good enough. But to me, the much bigger issue is that the flow of information which came to the board was flawed, and there were some very important pieces of information which were just missing and totally airbrushed, and there were other pieces of information which were massaged in a way that we didn't pick up on.
The absence of IT and legal expertise on the board, I say that in particular for non-execs, was that something you considered at the time as being something that was absent?
We did, when we were thinking about the nominations committee, we did, and I think it's there in one of the nominations committee reports, say that when the board is refreshed, we should try to refresh it with somebody with IT skills. So I don't think we thought of it as a screaming need, but we did think of it as it would be helpful to have somebody with good IT skills. Again, the benefit of hindsight is probably, that would have been much more helpful at the time. I think at the time we thought that we had found what needed to be found and needed to be fixed, and we were not as aware of the prosecutorial misfunction as maybe we should have been.
So those are the questions I have. Unless you have any questions, I know there are some from core participants. I think it's 10, is it 10 minutes? 50. Sorry, so I'm just taking time. Oh. So you're on mute, sir, sorry. So we'll take a break and try to resolve.
I think I've been unmuted, but for the last 30 seconds to a minute, I've heard everything, but I've lost the video, if you see what I mean.
I see. So
yeah, if we take 10 minutes, and then that can be put right.
Of course, yes. We can hear you now. So sorry if I was speaking over you and not noticing.
No, it's fine. I wasn't able to unmute myself, but I had some remote assistance for that. So I'd now like some remote assistance to resume looking at you all.
Thank you. So we'll arrange that. So if we come back at, should we say 5-2, sir?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So this is usually a formality, but hopefully you can see and hear us this time.
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Good. It's only one set of questions from Mr. Jacobs, who's got 10 to 15 minutes, I think.
Right, fine.
Thank you, sir. Mr. McCausland, good afternoon. I represent a large number of sub-postmasters and sub-mistresses who are affected by this scandal and are core participants in this inquiry, and I'm instructed by Howe & Co. I want to ask you about two things, hopefully quite briefly. The first topic is bugs in the Horizon system, and the second topic is the Post Office Advisory Council. In relation to bugs in the system, you gave evidence this morning, and you referred to a discussion with Susan Crichton that you were present at, and you said, and I'm just reading from the transcript, so correct me if I'm wrong, Susan Crichton informed you that in all previous prosecutions where Horizon data had been used, that's the Post Office, has been successful. And you said, I was talking to an experienced RMG director, who I think is Les Owen, is that right?
Yes.
So I'm going too quickly. And he was talking to your general counsel, and there was a very clear and a very robust answer from Susan Crichton that the system was sound. And that was your understanding, yes?
Yes.
And had you been told at that stage that there were no bugs in the Horizon system?
I had not been explicitly told anything about bugs at that stage. So this was very early in 2012, the January board meeting, I think, in 2012. And nowhere in my induction or in the Royal Mail Group handover had there been a conversation about bugs.
Right. Would it be fair to say that as a result of your conversation, or the conversation that you were involved in with Ms. Crichton and Mr. Owen, that it was your understanding, or it was the general understanding of you and others on the board, that the Horizon system was working perfectly and that there were no bugs in the system?
Yes.
Yeah.
I took comfort from the fact that the General Counsel was being very clear and very unequivocal with an experienced Royal Mail Group, as Les was Royal Mail Group and had been on the RMG board for some time. And I took comfort from that. I wasn't really involved in the discussion at that stage, if I'm honest. I was listening. But I definitely took comfort from that exchange where Susan was very clear. We had won all previous prosecutions. The audit report was very positive. It had been reviewed by Deloitte, and the legal claims, which I had not seen from but Access Legal, were weak. So yes, I took strong comfort from that.
And that was the message that you were getting from Post Office, wasn't it?
Yes.
So if we could move forward in time a little bit to the 8th of July 2013, which was the release of the Second Sight interim report.
Yes.
And again, taking you back to your evidence this morning, you said that you were unhappy that you were not kept properly informed about the progress of the interim report.
Yes.
And you said we had asked the board several times over the year how are Second Sight getting on. So to have it dropped on us, not in a written communication, not at a proper board meeting with proper papers, but just to have it thrown in as an AOB to say, I'm quoting you, actually, Second Sight report is coming out next week, and we're not happy with it because it's inaccurate. And by the way, there are bugs and flaws. That's how it landed on you, effectively.
Yes.
So we've gone, haven't we, from you having an understanding that there are no bugs in the system, everything's working perfectly, to a report from forensic experts which said that there were defects in Horizon Online that had impacted 76 branches. The receipts payments mismatch problem affected 62 branches, and the local suspense account problem affected 14 branches. So we've gone from one quite extreme position to another quite worrying position, haven't we?
We've gone from a very confident position to a less confident position.
Yeah.
But at that stage, it wasn't a particularly worrying.
Yeah. And I remember you said that it wasn't it should have been a red flag, but it was probably an amber flag. That's I think, what you said this morning.
That probably is right.
Yeah. So do you think that the board, when presented with a serious change of information about the Horizon system, should have requested more information from IT managers in Pole or even from Fujitsu at that point when you got that report?
So if I try to remember back to that time, when I got the report and read the report from Second Sight, and coupled with that had Paula's briefings verbally and in writing, the two were the two issues were somewhat separated in my mind. Mm-hmm. So neither Second Sight nor Paula were saying that the bugs and the issues that we were trying to find through Second Sight, i.e. the sub-postmaster losses, how have they arisen, what is happening to them, we have to follow the money. Those two issues were separate, and they were separate when Paula was describing them. She was very clearly articulating it verbally and in writing that these bugs were not linked to the Second Sight cases. And in the Second Sight report, they were also separate. Second Sight were clearly saying there are no systemic problems with Horizon. And there are two bugs that have been found, but they weren't saying these bugs have caused this problem. So with hindsight, wrongly, but at the time, both Second Sight and Paula led me to believe that the bugs were actually not the issue that we were grappling with here.
I think the essence of the question that I ask you on behalf of our clients is, wasn't this an opportunity for the board to get more information about why Post Office had been saying one thing and Second Sight was saying something slightly different? Wasn't there a case to consider whether the board were being misled by Post Office at this time?
I don't think Second Sight were saying something different to the Post Office. So Second Sight and the Post Office were both saying the same thing, which was that they had found these bugs, but they weren't the same bugs, or they weren't the problem which we were looking for in the Second Sight report. So the Second Sight report I read as saying there are definite problems here. You need to fix these things. I've been through them again before, I won't repeat them. And that was what they were saying. They weren't saying, you've got 2 bugs here, that's what you need to be looking for, boys.
Yeah.
The second site report, I wish with hindsight that the second site report had said, first of all, you've got big prosecutorial problems, which I watched the evidence from Ian and Ron, and they say that they said that to Susan. Nothing about that in the report. And I wish that they'd said, you've got bugs here, and also, I have been speaking to Gareth Jenkins, and he tells me this. So all of that stuff, I wish that had been in Second Sight's report, or Second Sight had come to the board and said that. But I read Second Sight's report, and I didn't. And even if I read it now, it doesn't come out at me as saying these bugs are the problem, which is, I think, why we didn't take the action that I wish we had taken.
So you and I'll move on after this. I think I have your answer, but I think that your answer is the fact that the Post Office were originally telling you there are no bugs, and that Second Sight in an interim report said there are bugs that have affected 76 branches. You didn't think at that point that someone in Post Office was misleading the board, which of course now we know to be the case.
Correct.
I'll move on, and I'm going to ask you about paragraph 34 of your statement, and if we could just maybe call that up. It's WITN 100290100, and it's page 14 of 83. And we'll just wait for that to load on the screen. So paragraph 34, please. Thank you. And this is, we can't see paragraph 33, but the headline is Post Office Advisory Council, POAC. And what you say at the bottom, we can see about 8 lines down, I was a member of this committee. 5 lines from the bottom. I was a member of this committee alongside Tim Franklin, who acted as chairman. And then you say POC was established in 2014. Well, the idea behind POC was to enable the company to better hear the views of SPMs and customers and to try and improve engagement and workplace culture. I was a member of this alongside Tim Franklin, who acted as chairman. POC was established in 2014 and was set up to help create a pathway to mutualisation where all the stakeholders, Post Office employees, sub-postmasters, customers and wider stakeholders worked collaboratively to improve the company for the good of all. Yes? You've relied in your statement on the POAC terms of reference. If we could maybe move to that document, which is POL 000228475. We'll just wait for that to come up on the screen. So we can see the purpose of the committee was to provide a forum for Post Office stakeholders and other experts, this is reading from the top, to discuss issues of interest and importance that impact on customers, stakeholders and their communities. Now a stakeholder is an SPM, that's right, isn't it?
Yes, amongst others.
Yeah. And the role of the council, you can see the bullet points under role, was to provide a two-way channel of communications between Post Office and its stakeholders, so sub-postmasters and Post Office would be included in that, to provide a mechanism for stakeholders and experts to offer views and advice to the Post Office board and the group executives on subjects brought to it, to increase understanding and strengthen the relationships between Post Office, its stakeholders and wider interest groups, and to provide a community for advocacy and communication of Post Office issues. And do you think that this is a potential vehicle that could have dealt with sub-postmaster issues with the Horizon system? It certainly sounds that way.
I'm not sure that it could, to be honest. So the culture of the post office was not good, particularly at the beginning. It was very head office is God and everyone else is not good. It didn't talk about customer at all. It was arrogant. There was a blame and defensive culture. So throughout my time there, we tried hard to shift the culture into something, frankly, more normal. There was, again, throughout my time, a plan, I wouldn't call it any more than that, but a plan to prepare the company to one day become a mutual. It was totally impossible at the beginning because there were conditions. You would need to be financially sustainable to become a mutual, and that was nowhere near. But the government quite liked the idea of a mutual. Tim and I very much liked the idea of it being a mutual, and therefore we took a number of steps to try to change the culture, to try to engage more with sub-postmasters. So we forced part of Paula's bonus to be on sub-postmaster engagement. We developed a lot of engagement mechanisms, just communication. So lots more communication with the sub-postmasters and huge amounts more listening from them. So the POAC was designed really just as one of the strands in that, where we would get together a group of people, sub-postmasters, but a lot of customers as well, industry people, so people like Google were on it, just as a way of opening up the culture, listening, debating, having different views. I think to grapple with the horizon issues, horizon issues inevitably are very technical. And I think you really needed a group of specialists with a lot of time to do that. And the people on the POAC were giving their time, but they were giving limited amounts of time because they all had jobs elsewhere. So to expect them to really dive into something which wasn't their specialist subject, I'm not sure that the POAC would have been a great vehicle to tackle the horizon issues.
In light of what you say in your statement, though, where you say that it was to help stakeholders, which includes sub-postmasters, to work collaboratively to improve the company for the good of all. You've said that there were sub-postmasters who were members of the POAC, is that right?
I believe so.
And were they sub-postmasters who had knowledge of the horizon issue, do you recall?
So I don't recall knowledge of horizon, absolutely, users of horizon. Of the horizon issue, I don't remember any conversation at a POAC regarding the issues that are being talked about in this inquiry.
There was a provision to invite people to the meetings.
Yes.
And also the committee fed back to the board and the board fed back to the committee, that's right, isn't
yes.
it? And did anyone ever suggest, because you knew, Post Office knew what the issues were with the sub-postmasters and the horizon issues, did anyone ever suggest inviting people like Lord Arbuthnot or individual sub-postmasters who had grievances to talk to the committee to try and resolve the issues at that level? If someone had said, for example, doesn't have to be a technical point, but I can see the cursors moving on my screen, someone's in my system, I think there have been miscarriages of justice, all my uncles and aunts have been prosecuted, they've done nothing wrong. That sort of thing might have been able to cut through the culture of the Post Office. Do you agree?
I understand what you're saying, but I'm not sure that I agree.
Okay.
So the agenda for the POAC was formed by the members. So the members of the POAC would say what they wanted to talk about. And Tim, as chair, would basically agree. So I mean, Tim is the nicest, most collaborative man in the world, and Tim would broadly shape the agenda based on what the members wanted to talk about. And those things tended to be more the strategy for the post office, where we were going with financial services, why don't we do more for an energy and telecom offer, how can we get better at listening. Network transformation was an issue. So they came from, the agenda came from the members, which was what we were trying to do. I wish that we had more direct contact as a board. So I'm not sure the Post Office Advisory Committee is the right place for that. But as a board, I absolutely wish that Lord Arbuthnot and Second Sight and sub-postmasters had come to the board, and we had more direct contact in that way. Because, I mean, I've said it several times, but I'll stress it again. The NEDs on the board were not trying to cover up, were not trying to shy away from problems. We were actively trying to find problems, and we thought we had found some of the problems, and we thought we tried to fix some of those problems. We clearly didn't, and actually the one thing that I think might have helped to unlock that and to change what we were doing was direct contact with JFSA, Sir Alan Bates, Lord Arbuthnot, sub-postmasters. And I regret that didn't happen.
I think I've probably asked all my questions. I'm just going to see if there's anything else that How and Co and Mr. Steen would like me to ask you. No, that's all. That's been helpful. I'm grateful. Thank you.
So that's it, is it, Mr. Stevens?
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. McCausland, for making your witness statement, answering very many questions during the course of the day, being interrupted by a fire alarm, and momentarily going off my screen. But nonetheless, we got through the day, and I'm very grateful for your evidence.
Thank you, sir.
Right, tomorrow morning can we make it 10 o'clock, Mr. Stevens, so that my train doesn't maroon me and make you all late?
Yes, of course, sir.
Fine.
Thank you, sir.